Okay, it's recording.
Oh,
All right.
very-
So, Conversations with Alden. We are going to talk about the Mafia today.
yeah. I should be clear that by now the people I know have gone into the kind of post Tony Soprano going straight period. This was back in the 50s when it was still a force to be reckoned with on the streets.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see. Going for a ride. My friend Ed Falk, we were, I think, out of high school. Yeah, definitely. And he had gotten married. He had gotten divorced. He had not made his support payments and had been in jail. So he was out of jail. And he and I were walking down the main street out of our neighborhood toward downtown. When a Chrysler pulls up next to us. Now, the gang that my father was affiliated with drove Cadillacs, so this wasn't our gang.
Uh-huh.
This was some other people. And the guy said, get in, I'll give you a drive downtown. And it turns out that Ed had borrowed money from these fellows and owed them in debt. So I said, oh, Jesus. So we had to talk about that as we drove down. And the guy, Ed was pretty good with electronics. So the guy was saying, look, if you need work, we can, fix you up with something.
Uh-huh.
Wiretapping or God knows what. I said, oh, thank you. And he dropped us off downtown, and Ed said, how can I be in touch with you? And he said, oh, don't worry. We know where you are. We'll be in touch with you. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
So that was just a little brush with their loan department. See. At another point, I was going to community college in Waterbury, and I'm not sure what brought me down to the riverfront area, but there's a part of town that's a little bit rough, and I had wandered into a tavern there, and I sit down and in this kind of he looks like a made guy. He's got the 3-piece pinstripe suit, a little bit hefty, but very friendly. And we got talking, and I well first he tells me some things about myself that he picked up from observation, kind of about what a good gypsy would do.
Yeah.
And I was telling him that I was going to school, and he was telling me about his psychology practice. Like he said, see that woman coming through the door? She's going to act up at some point. There's something wrong with her. So I said, how can you tell that? He said, well, look, she just walked right in here. Most sane people would open the door and look in and see what was going on before they stepped in.
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, a little bit later, she was acting out and talking to invisible people, and being strange.
Uh-huh.
He said that in his work for the association that he got to interview people. He was basically the rat detector, you know.
Interesting.
You know,
Interesting. Yeah.
um, and I didn't ask him what happened to people after he had identified them. I thought that wouldn't be a good topic.
Yeah, you don't want to know.
Yeah, but I was impressed. He's very, very smart guy, very friendly, and very knowledgeable in a non-college type of way, but
Yeah.
quite effective.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. There was a movie that I saw. I forget the name of it, but it was about a con man that took in a woman who was an expert at con men and their games. Oh, it was something about games. I'll try to look it up.
Okay.
But
Reminded you of that guy?
yeah,
What did he tell you about yourself when you went in? Do you remember?
no, I forget.
Yeah.
But I, too much time.
Yeah.
So let's see. We got the psychologist. We got the going for a ride. Meeting with the Godfather. These are mixed up in time, so there are different periods of my life. With the meeting with the Godfather, I was a kid. I wasn't too swift.
Yeah.
And I told you that my dad had been in the rackets, and then he became a state trooper, and he was a good state trooper, except that uh, whenever the state troopers were coming into town to bust people, somehow they mysteriously knew about it, and the betting tickets would be burned, and all the back the blackboards would be washed and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so he was working. I like to think that he was mediating between conflicting groups.
Yeah. Keeping the peace in a way.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, so we get dressed up, and he takes the family to a restaurant on the east side of town, which I later, when I was doing research on crime families in Waterbury, I later learned that this was a notorious gang hideout or hangout. I didn't know that at the time. The last time I was in town, I tried cruising the neighborhood to see if I could find it, but I couldn't locate it. Either my memory failed or it was gone.
Yeah.
So we go into kind of like an alcove, a private room thing, and this gentleman with a nice suit, very natty, good posture, very polite and well spoken,
Mhm.
sits sits on a chair a little bit higher than the rest of us, so that he's kind of holding court.
Right.
And he's very interested in the welfare of the family and the welfare of the children, and how are you doing and what do you need, and uh, I think patron is the word, I believe. But anyway, I think I had manicotti, and I wasn't paying attention to my mother's reaction. She was probably had her ears perked up.
Mhm. What did your mother think about your dad's? You said she's the one that convinced him to get out of the rackets, right?
Yeah, he when I was born, he had been working. He was still working with the carnivals, and she, with me in arms, she went down to a Midway in New Jersey where he was working and had a little chat. That either he was going to come home and straighten out, or she was going to take me and go back to Georgia. So my life could have involved cotton fields if uh, if things had gone differently.
Yeah, yeah.
At one point, she did a trial run. My mom and I went on the train down to Georgia uh, and visited her father, who was at that point running this little Crossroads General Store with dust around it and chickens running around and
Yeah, yeah.
cotton fields and the whole deal.
Wow.
And 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 they confabbed. So I think that she was making her plans.
He was getting ready. Yeah.
This was a little, well, yeah. I was older then. I wasn't a kid in arms, but I suspect that my mother was still exploring her options.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it. So that's when your dad became a state trooper?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
no. He came back to Waterbury, and the Second World War was warming up, and he wasn't interested in shooting people professionally like that.
Yeah.
So he there was another scene that burned into my memory. I was in the back seat of the car, and we were parked across from the post office where the draft board was, and I I was with my mom, and my dad went over to the post office, to kind of try to argue his case, and I there's a great deal of tension in that scene, even though I didn't know what was going on. It was like when he was going out on undercover raids. It was very, very tense.
Yeah.
So he got he got a job doing security for a factory that was doing wartime production, Waterbury Tool. I think they made ball bearings.
Yeah.
And so that was his first step into legitimate work. He got to wear a uniform, acted official, and somehow he did the next step up to state trooper. This was back at the back at the time when the police frequently recruited from the underworld.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they assumed that that these folks knew what all the rackets were, knew what the games were, and could go in the right direction. And in my father's case, they were right. He did at least a couple of undercover operations that he told us about that sounded well. That was where he needed to get his old shoulder holster out and
Yeah.
play ball.
Uh-huh. Your dad sounds like an interesting guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he eventually. I'm not sure what the neighbors thought, but he, he here he was now being a cop with a fancy cop car and
Right.
the hat and the jodhpurs and the whole thing. So they uh, had more respect for him.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back then, you were very much identified by what you did for a living, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was what people thought of you. Not so much anymore. Some still, but yeah, back then you were very much locked into a stereotype, I think,
Yeah.
depending on what you did and who your family was, and
Oh, very much, very much.
yeah, yeah. How old were you when you left home?
Uh, well, my, my mother died when I was around 14 or so. And I was kind of a basket case after that and was getting into trouble. So my father uh, pulled some strings with Harold Bates, who was a wealthy stockbroker who lived in my father's territory. And my father had stopped him for speeding and had a chat. And they became acquainted. And anyway, Harold Bates decided that he was going to give me a scholarship to a good prep school. And I interviewed at a couple, and it ended up at Hoosac, which is one up in the north woods, kind of Hudson Valley. Um,
Did you know what you wanted to study there, or did you figure it out when you were there?
oh, that we just had a standard course.
Just kind of like normal, generic.
Yeah, people who were headed for the priesthood would take special courses in Latin. I didn't do that. Everybody had to take French. The founders of the school were Huguenots. I don't know whether you know much about that history.
A little bit, not much, yeah.
These were French Protestants, and they annoyed the royalty because they just answered to God rather than the king.
Mm.
Uh, and they were persecuted and expelled and all. When they came to the New World, they usually affiliated with whatever the dominant uh, Protestant group was.
Mm.
So we went to the Congregational Church, or at least my mother sent us. She didn't appear very often, and I don't recall my father appearing ever.
Huh.
Uh, anyway, so I was away from home at prep school for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't manage to get into a good college because I was lazy and my grades were crummy.
Mm.
Uh, or there were other things that I was interested in besides what was on the curriculum.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, so I went to the local state college for a while, and but I graduated in 1959. I started the state college in 1960, and there was so much obviously going on in that period. You know that I decided that college was not where it was happening. That if I really wanted to get an education, I better get out in the world and start interacting.
Yeah.
So I left college after about a semester and went down to New York and started pursuing the rest of my life.
Yeah. What made you get into the art scene?
Uh, I think I was inspired by my grand aunt Florence Myers, who I stayed with at her cottage up in Maine sometimes. She had been in the arts for since way back.
Mm.
Uh, so that was an impetus that helped to guide me. in the direction that, and probably when I was in the 8th grade, I did a good drawing of a dinosaur and got complimented on that, so decided that I should do more drawing and get more compliments.
I would imagine that that's where a lot of really interesting people were too, in that kind of scene. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It made for yeah. The folks that I met in that world were not boring at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're looking for life lessons and adventure, seems to me
Right.
that would be the natural gravitation. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I learned a lot. That's the truth.
Yeah. And it sounds like you had a lot of really interesting adventures, of course, that which we are recording.
Yeah.
Posterity.
Do you know who Ayn Rand was?
Yeah.
Okay. The woman I was dating at the time, who is the mother of my eldest daughter, was a big fan, and I wasn't signed up for anything else, so I just went along with the program and read the thick books, and then in New York went to Nathaniel Branden Institute where they were teaching about the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand occasionally gave lectures. Let's see, and they gave classes in like art history. Nathaniel Branden is a psychologist. He was giving his basic psychology. He was the one who, when you go for a psychological interview and they ask about your self-esteem, that was his contribution.
Okay.
So and then I studied economics there with her friend Alden Greenspan, who was running the economy shortly after that.
Right. Yeah.
So when I finally decided to go back to college, I tested out of most of the first 2 years from what I had learned there with writing and psychology and aesthetics and art history,
Yeah.
economics, and so forth.
Interesting. When you did go back to college, what was your aim? Like what degree?
Well, let's see. I was still interested in psychology, but the plan was to minor in library science because this was the 60s, and I knew from the hippie communes that one librarian could support a whole commune, and that you could get those jobs anywhere in the country. So I thought that would be a good approach. So yeah. I started studying library science at New Mexico Highlands. Highlands was a place, or New Mexico was a place that I had been to when I made excursions from Denver. One of my friends, Arthur Naranjo, had taken me down there and introduced me to Las Vegas and Santa Fe and all that. So when I had the chance, I said, "Oh my God, they could pay me to live there." So
yeah.
So I did that, and what it turned out was that there were a lot of Jungians there because at one point Carl Jung had made a famous trip to Taos to the center Mabel Dodge Lujan was running.
Uh-huh.
It was, you know, you'd see Greta Garbo, Einstein, all kinds of people would be drawn there, great minds.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's really interesting. Yeah. Taos is still a hub of um, differently thinking people.
yeah, but the Mabel Dodge Lujan place was eventually taken over by Dennis Hopper.
Dennis Hopper,
Yeah,
the actor.
yeah. He he was also connected with Las Vegas. One of the first scenes in Easy Rider, where they come into this town and take their motorcycles at the end of a parade going around the plaza. That was the Las Vegas Plaza.
Interesting. Yeah, I will link Maybe Todd Luhan with the recording. I found a little article about her. This looks really interesting.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. She was fascinating.
Yeah.
Some friends of mine in the Connecticut art world. Oh, names. It's a a very bright couple. It'll come to me. Uh, I'm not blanking on that. It's a long time ago. I don't bring the names up, but this couple were artists, and at one point they had made the pilgrimage out to Taos,
Mhm.
and you know who D.H. Lawrence was?
Is he a writer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was an English writer. It was some of his writings were instrumental in getting the the taboos removed from dealing with sex in literature.
Okay.
Uh, let's see. Lady Chatterley's Lover was one of the famous ones.
Well, yeah, I am. Haven't read it, but I'm familiar with it.
It's probably not terribly relevant these days, but
Yeah, probably not terribly risque these days either.
no, it was big news at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, what the hell? Her name is just floating there, just a little bit out of reach.
Yeah, it'll come.
Yeah, but anyway, she when she was there, she was screwing the not the gardener, uh, the groundskeeper. No, stable boy for
Stable.
for the place. Uh, which was kind of a D.H. Lawrence storyline
Right. Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah.
Some of these characters showed up in one of the stories that she wrote. The plumes, or he wrote the Plume Serpent, which was set in Mexico in the story, but was actually about northern New Mexico where he was living at that time.
Interesting. Huh.
So that's how so that, oh, and so I'm going to college there, and I'm minoring in library science. And I later found out that during the Vietnam War, that a lot of people had escaped the draft by going to college, and you know they had masters in English, they had masters in literature and everything. So I said, I'm going to have a hard time competing with these people in the job market because they're going to get their library degrees, but they've also got some credibility.
Mm.
So let's see. I started out in the school library working in the periodical section. I was running that. I told you about the young lady who was running the front desk.
No.
Oh, she was one of the prostitutes in the process of rehabilitation.
Okay.
Because the school had a Marxist revolution and was Cuban based. The idea was that prostitution is an illness of capitalism where people get commodified and bought and sold.
Okay.
So they were trying to get beyond that. So the school was awash with rehabilitating hookers.
Yeah.
And the nice young lady at the front desk who I managed showed up for work with her tank top and hot pants and platform shoes. And, she was dressed professionally, but for the wrong profession. So I advised her to pay attention to what her contemporaries were wearing around there. Yeah. And pretty soon she was in jeans and t-shirt and had a pretty good Chicano boyfriend, and
Excellent.
Yeah, she went on her course.
Yeah. Well, we're at about a half an hour now, so we should probably wrap up. But what do you want to talk about next week?
Well, you've heard most of my stories. What do you think? Do you have any leanings?
I want to hear the stories about the Marxist people in the art world on the East Coast.
That's a good story. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that next week because that part of that story was just amazing to me. So we will do that next week. In the meantime, I will talk to you soon. I'm going to head over to the studio right now and play. So.
Very good. Have a good day, and thank you so much for getting us started.
Yep, I will talk to you again probably before next week. Yeah. Okay. Bye.